going to East Africa, more specifically Kenya, the national park called Tsavo. And the period of time that we're interested in the most is the British period. Originally, this area of Africa was occupied by the Sultan of Oman, who had a massive slave trade going on through here. The Portuguese came in and pushed the Sultan out, and there was a fight between the two of them, but eventually the British take over in the 19th century. And by late 19th century, the British are starting to develop this area. Back as far as the 1500s, Mombasa had been the major trading port for the Omanis, and the Portuguese recognized what a great port that was. It is in fact probably the best seaport along the eastern African coast. In those days, the Germans had German East Africa, and they were threatening to absorb Uganda to the north on this map. The Belgians were in the Congo, and they were also moving towards Uganda, and the British decided that they'd like to have it as well. So they proposed to build a railway from Mombasa up to what is now Nairobi. Nairobi, incidentally, just means cold water. Until the railway came through, it was simply a swamp. Now it's the capital of Kenya. And that railroad goes from Mombasa and then crosses the Tsavo River, which is near the center of this map, and heads on up toward Nairobi and then on to Uganda. The critics of this railway, and there were many, because in today's dollars that would cost almost $1 billion, they called this the Lunitic line, sort of like the bridge to nowhere.
The line ran 600 miles from the coast through Nairobi all the way to Lake Victoria. It was built to bring British goods to the interior and raw materials out to ports on the coast. It would encourage British farmers to come out here and settle. There was plenty to merit the title Lunatic Line. There was the cost, £534 million in today's money. There was the engineering required to allow a train to climb from sea level into the mountains and then to plunge down into the Great Rift Valley, and to construct 1,200 bridges on the way.
But it wasn't the British who built the railway, it wasn't even the Africans. This remarkable feat was the work of 32,000 labourers, craftsmen and engineers brought in by the British from India. They knew how to build railways there.
Not only did Indian workers have the skills to build the railway and the experience, they also were familiar with the wage system. The local Africans were not familiar with labor. It had never occurred to them to work for money. It simply wasn't part of their culture, and they didn't do it. So virtually all the workers on the railway line are not Africans. They are, in fact, Indian. On average, the Lunatic Express cost the lives of 4 workers for every mile of track. Excursions into the interior almost invariably started in Mombasa, and before the time of the railway, those excursions almost always involved hiring a small army of porters. The railway changed all that. It started in Mombasa on the coast and therefore at sea level, and from there it rose steadily into the highlands. The first barrier that it crossed of any significance was the desert. Since speed was essential, the British Empire laid down a temporary track followed by a permanent track. In the Taru Desert, this became a problem because the temporary track could be undermined. Once upon a time, a rhinoceros stepped near the temporary track bed, and a rain came up and a puddle formed in the footprints of the rhinoceros, and it undermined the train. The train overturned. Now, the interesting thing about this particular train was it was a troop train. One of the reasons why speed was so important was because troops were needed in Uganda, where there was a small war going on. As the progress of the railroad continued, it rose up from sea level, past the desert, and into tsetse territory. Now, the rail construction depended a great deal on thousands of animals, and the tsetse killed off almost all of them. And that basically brought work to a halt. So in the tsetse area, we find 1,500 out of the 1,800 transport animals all killed. And to some extent, those animals were replaced with machinery, steam tractors in particular. After going through the tsetse belt, the next major obstacle as the expedition climbed into the mountains was they were hit by a drought. They surmounted the drought and made it to the eastern escarpment, and then they came down over the escarpment and found easy track laying in the Rift Valley, and then they went up over the western escarpment, and after it crossed that peak, it was easy going down to Lake Victoria. During the track laying, of course, there were numerous bridges that were thrown up and a fair number of labor disputes that had to be settled.
Now the year is 1900, and there's a problem. Up in Nairobi, there's a labor dispute. And so the railway sends a negotiator up, and his name is Charles Ryle. And Charles is a superintendent of police. And he takes the railway from Mombasa up towards Nairobi. And on the way up, he and his friends heard about a man-eating lion. And so they decided that they would move their car off onto a siding that was near where the lion had last been seen, and that they would wait all night if necessary to be able to shoot the man-eater. Well, they were going to take turns as to who was staying up and who was sleeping, and Charles' turn comes up. And Charles is guarding the door. One of the men is sleeping on the floor, and one of them is on the top bunk. Now, Charles gets very, very sleepy, and he decides he's going to go to sleep as well. So he does go to sleep. He goes onto the main bunk, the lower bunk. And the lion comes at this time, and he starts nosing around the car. And Charles has forgotten to latch the door. And so the lion is able to use his nose to push the door open. The lion gets in, and he is stepping on the man on the floor, and he grabs Charles. The noise awakens the person on the top bunk. He jumps on top of the lion and uses the lion to get to the toilet, where he locks himself into the toilet. Charles, unfortunately, is in the mouth of the lion. The lion's tail hits the door, and the door slams shut, and it frightens the lion. The lion thinks he's trapped, and so the lion smashes through the window, taking Charles with him. This is the only time that I know of where labor negotiations have ended with one of the negotiators being eaten by a lion.
Oh, and do keep a lookout for this train seat. You will see it again. We're going to be focusing now on the railway bridge crossing over the Tsavo River. The first British engineer that was there, who built a bridge, a temporary bridge, was Ronald Preston. Now, Tsavo had its name a long time before the British were in this area. Tsavo means the place of the slaughter, and it probably refers to some wars between the Maasai and the local indigenous population. When the Maasai declared war and moved through an area, they left no one alive, neither women nor children. Tsavo had a reputation. It was the main transit route for the slave and ivory traffic down to Mombasa. And there was a legend that people would disappear from the caravan, from the convoy. People that lived in Mombasa might disappear in the Tsavo area even when they were headed back to Mombasa, where they would be paid, and it seems unlikely that people would simply desert at that stage. When Preston got into the area, he too started losing people. At first, he thought that the individual's co-workers had done them in because they had been unusually frugal, and that they had killed them for their money. But then he started discovering bodies, and he discovered that these were lions that were doing the killing. And the railway workers discovered the same thing, and they threatened to revolt and go home. Well, Preston told them that the problem was only here at Tsavo, and that they only had to lay track out of Tsavo to get out of danger. And so the Indian workers worked like Trojans to get out, and they laid track in record time. Even so, Preston lost 17 people. Next, Lieutenant Colonel John Henry Patterson arrives. He's a railroad engineer that's been charged with putting in the permanent buildings and permanent bridge over the Tsavo River. But he starts having the same problem that Preston had. The lions start carrying off his people, and that's the story that we're going to be telling.
I've been reading John Patterson's book, The Man-Eaters of Tsavo. It's one of the best hunting books around, and I know that because Teddy Roosevelt said so. What Teddy Roosevelt said was, the most thrilling book of true stories ever written is Colonel Patterson's The Man-Eaters of Tsavo. That must make it one of the best.
Now, there have been 3 movies made out of the Preston Lions of Tsavo experience, 2 of them in the 1950s, but the best one is The Ghost in the Darkness in the 1990s. Now, best doesn't mean that it is historically accurate in every detail, but compared to the other 2 movies, it's fairly close to the 1907 book that Patterson wrote.
This is the most famous true African adventure. Famous because what took place at Tsavo never happened before. Colonel John Patterson was there when it began. A fine Irish gentleman, a brilliant engineer. Remember this. Even the most impossible parts of this story really happened.
I'm sure we will succeed. Okay.
We're in a race, Colonel, and the prize is nothing less than the continent of Africa. We are building the most expensive and daring railroad in history for the glorious purpose of saving Africa from the Africans and, of course, to end slavery. Our competitors are the Germans and the French. We are ahead, and we will stay ahead, provided you do what I've hired you to do. Build a bridge across the River Tsavo and be finished in 5 months.
The railway neatly divides Tsavo National Park into two halves, east and west. Together, both east and west are larger than the U.S. state of New Jersey. And so that's our next objective. We're headed for Tsavo National Park, where Patterson put his bridge.
Colonel Patterson.
No, thank you.
Colonel Patterson, yes. No, thank you. No, thank you. No, thank you. Welcome to Africa, sir. And good morning. Angus Starling. I'm to assist you at Tsavo.
Follow me, sir. That's your first trip to Africa, yes? Good, because I've reserved the best seats on the train.
Amazing, aren't they? You know the most amazing thing about them? They sleep only 5 minutes a day. Don't like them much. The females are bigger. Only animals here like that. Have to be or they wouldn't survive because the males eat the young. In Africa for a year, and I don't know what you know. How long have you been here? Just about 24 hours. But I've been longing for this all my life.
Welcome to Tsavo.
This is the old Tsavo station. There is a new Tsavo station, and this Tsavo station is no longer in prime condition.
Advance camp is across there.
How many workers?
3,000 men laying track, even though your bridge is not yet built. Each day, they move 2 miles further away. Did it look like this in your mind?
No. This is more difficult. Should be difficult.
What better job in all the world than build a bridge?
Now this is the actual Tsavo River, the way that it was the day that I saw it. You can see it's not really much of a river, but it is the biggest one in this particular neighborhood. Now, there is something going on today that's going to cause me a lot of trouble. Security here is very, very high. And in fact, some of the filming that I wanted to do, I couldn't do. And the reason is because that second bridge in the background is the new bridge. The old bridge is the one in the foreground. And the president is going to be here to inaugurate the new rail service. And that's caused a security problem. There's a ranger with me.
This is Patterson's bridge behind me. It's not exactly the way that Patterson built the bridge. In World War I, the Germans came over and blew up the bridge, but it's substantially the same, and I think maybe a lot of the stonework is the same that Patterson put up. Behind me, there's a large highway, and so you can probably hear some highway noise. And further on down, there's another railway bridge, and that's the new bridge, and it's going to be inaugurated tomorrow.
This is the new locomotive making the test run. The movie bridge is now in the lower right, and the actual Patterson Bridge is in the upper left. And notice that the road bed on that one is black. If you take a look at the post-World War I bridge, you'll see that the sides are silver, indicating that they've replaced the steel with aluminum. And when the Germans blew up the bridge, well, that's the picture that you see in the lower right now. You can see that there's a certain amount of carriage material and so forth that was damaged in the explosion, or destroyed really in the explosion. Because the Patterson Bridge was an important link between Nairobi and Mombasa, in fact a vital link, it had to be replaced very quickly after it was destroyed. And there was a wooden bridge that was thrown up as a temporary bridge, and it probably looked a great deal like the bridge that Preston threw up before Patterson put in his permanent bridge. The new rail is built by the Chinese, and it's a high-speed rail. The river itself, the Tsavo River, originates on Mount Kilimanjaro, which is itself a volcano. In fact, it is 3 volcanoes.
The men called them the ghost in the darkness. There were 2 of them, and that had never happened before, because men-eaters are always alone. They owned the night, but they also attacked in daylight, alone or together, without fear or reason. Some thought they were not lions at all, but the spirits of dead medicine men come back to spread madness. For others, they were the devil, sent to stop the white men from owning the world. I believed this, that they were evil. And what better ground for evil to walk than Tsavo? Because this is what the word Tsavo means, a place of slaughter.